help out. So, without further ado, a man I am most proud to be able to introduce, the man who gives service as a naval officer, as a veteran, cabinet member, and of course, Mayor Pete. Here we go.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you. Gosh. Don't I feel welcome here? Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you, General Eaton. Thank you, VoteVets, for hosting us today. And thank you for joining us for a very important conversation I've been looking forward to. To the many people here who wore the uniform of this nation, thank you for your service. And to every one of you who chose to be here this evening, I know you got a lot on your plate, a lot you could be doing. I can't thank you enough for joining me for this conversation. It feels really good to be back in Iowa. Anyone can come to Iowa just before an election's coming up. I wanted to make sure I had a chance to talk with the people I got to know 5 or 6 years ago and people I'm seeing for the very first time. Last time I was in Iowa, or last time I was in Cedar Rapids, I was in my previous capacity as secretary bringing a few $1 million from the Biden infrastructure plan to fix up your airport. So it felt really good to step off that plane yesterday and have a look around at that terminal. That's coming along nicely. Nice job with that. It's got that new terminal smell that only a former transportation secretary can love. And the last time I was here before that, I was sort of winning the Iowa caucus for the president. So that was fun. So thanks for that, too. So, you know, you come to a place you haven't been to in a little while, and your mind goes to everything that's the same and everything that's changed. And a lot's changed. When I was running around here 5 or 6 years ago introducing myself, I was before COVID. It was before ChatGPT. It was before Chasten and I became parents to an incredible son and daughter, Gus and Penelope, our twins who came into our lives and changed everything. Other things haven't changed so much, including the fundamental importance and crisis of trust in our society and in our country. I believe it's never been more important. 5 years ago, I wrote a whole book about trust, and I think it's even more important now than it was then. And that's part of why I wanted to be in Iowa in a room filled with veterans, because you know a thing or two about trust. You know what it means to trust somebody with your life, even if you just met them, because you have been in situations where there is no alternative. You know what it means to earn trust, because you have raised your right hand and pledged your very life to the preservation of our republic. So we're going to need you. And we're going to need everybody in this community and every community who recognizes the fundamental nature of this country and the fact that it is facing its most profound test in generations. We are being tested on nothing less than whether the United States of America is, in fact, the freedom-loving people that we believe and know ourselves to be. Let us meet that test. Let me be clear, that is not an academic concern. It's one that comes into our everyday lives. Because if this is a country where the government, the head of the government, or very wealthy men who advise and or instruct the head of our government with no accountability, that means that if you're a farmer caught up in a useless trade war, the answer is too bad. If you're a small business owner who doesn't even know what you can order or what you're going to be charging, the answer is we don't really have to answer to you. If you're one of the 10 million Americans who we just learned stand to be kicked off of Medicaid if this Republican budget goes through Congress, the answer is go pound sand. That is unacceptable in a democracy. So this is an immediate concern, not a theoretical one. But I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that America will meet that test and show itself to be that freedom-loving people and stand up, not just for some lofty principle, but most importantly, as every veteran knows how to do, stand up for each other, which is what I saw every day I came to Iowa. That means recognizing what we must stand up against and, just as importantly, being clear about what we're for. Even in this moment when opposition to the abuses coming out of Washington has never mattered more, this isn't just about what we are trying to block. It's about what we are determined to build. It's about what could be better, what will be better, if we follow the guiding lights of this country. And another thing that hasn't changed from when I was running around here 5 or 6 years ago is that I believe that rests on the principles of freedom, security, and democracy, correctly understood. And yeah, freedom means freedom from overbearing government, something we should be able to join hands, progressives, conservatives, libertarians, at a moment when the President of the United States thinks he can send you to another country or shut down the broadcast license of a TV station if he doesn't like what it has to say. That is not freedom. We have lost some freedoms in this country during this administration and the previous Trump administration. But we will not rest until we have restored freedoms like a woman's right to choose. We have grown less secure as a country. There is no doubt about it. If the leader of the United States of America, the most powerful member of the human species, is considering taking a $400 million jumbo jet as a gift from a foreign government, that makes us less secure. If the Secretary of Defense can randomly text highly sensitive classified information to some dude on his phone, we are less secure. But just as importantly, we could be more secure. I mean, that's just the bare minimum. We could do so much better. We could be more secure in the face of 21st century threats, from what AI represents to what climate change is doing to us. And we will be more secure if we're the kind of country where, just to take one example, if you wear the uniform and you're ready to put your life on the line for this country, we will honor and respect your service based on your performance, not your gender identity. Let alone try to kick you out over it. We will be more secure when we honor those who serve, no matter who they are or who they love or how they identify. And democracy. We know what it means to be a better democracy or to have democracy slip through our fingers. We've never been a perfect democracy, but democracy is the most important thing about our country, and our country is the most important democracy in the world. We got to lean into that. So I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that we could live up to that. That at the end of the day, the vast majority of people in this country understand that what makes America America is that the American people bow to no king. So we got some work to do. We have to make it clear right now, not waiting for some campaign cycle to play out, but right now, every day, talking to friends, and this is hard, talking to neighbors, talking to that uncle, who we really do love, but he's believing all the stuff he's seeing on Instagram, and we got to talk. It's talking to each other. And yes, it means getting the attention of your elected officials about the policies that they are allowing to go through. If we do that right, we're going to make ourselves proud of this now very difficult, very painful time in our country. A couple days ago, I was driving our son and daughter back from school, and we passed a supermarket near our house, which has a flagpole. And my daughter pointed to it. She said, "Papa, American flag," which I thought was really cool for a 3-year-old. And we started talking about it. I said, "Yeah, you're right. That's an American flag." I said, "Guess what? It has a nickname. It's called the Stars and Stripes, because it's got those white stars and those red and white stripes." She said, "Oh, what else is it called?" I was like, well, it's called Old Glory. This is the tradition of that flag as a battle flag in important moments in our country's story." She said, "Oh, what else is it called?" I was like, Stars and Stripes, I already said that one. Star Spangled Banner. It's called that because there's a song about it. She said, "Oh, what else is it called?" You ever talk to a 3-year-old? I was out of nicknames by then. But I got to thinking, she knows what the flag is, but she doesn't yet know what it represents, what it means to all of us, and what it meant to me. When she and her brother are old enough, I'm going to tell them. I'm going to tell them what it was like to salute that flag. I'm going to tell them what it was like to have that flag velcroed to my shoulder when we got into a vehicle to go outside the wire in Afghanistan. I'm going to tell her and her brother one day what it felt like that handful of times that, as an officer, I had the solemn ceremonial duty of taking that flag and handing it to somebody and saying, "On behalf of the President of the United States, the Department of the Navy, and a grateful nation, I present you with this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved ones' faithful and honorable service." One day I'll tell her that too. But before they're old enough for me to lay anything that heavy on them, I'll tell them about the values that that flag represents, the story, the incredibly rich and inspiring, and yes, very, very complicated story of everything that has happened under that flag and in the name of that flag. And I'll tell them about how what made America and makes America great is not something that we dust off by saying the word again. What makes America great is its ability to wrestle with its darkest demons and come out stronger and better for it. But that doesn't just happen. These times are painful, they are complicated, but so is every period of history that has ever inspired us. Every person we have ever been inspired by. They didn't do the things that made them inspiring on a perfectly calm, clear day. They did it in the face of headwinds. They did it in the face of pain. They did it in incredibly unstable and difficult moments. And so we're living in one of those, and that's not a fun thing. But in a strange way, it's a kind of a privilege. Because there will be no question that we, American citizens, in this moment, we're living in a time of enormous importance. That we would do our part to make sure that that flag and everything that is done in its name lives up to its promise. That's the job of every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine, but it's also the job of every citizen. And citizenship plays out in so many ways, and this is one of them. So I'm excited to have a conversation with you. And with that, here endeth the monologue. The mics are going to go around, and I can't wait to talk to you about whatever's on your mind. Thanks again for coming here. So, you got something to say or something to ask, put your hand up, and when I call on you, please say a word, your name, and where you're from, and right here in front of me. I'm going to start with you, sir.
Right here, sir. Hi. Oh, here, I'll hold it for you.
Okay. My name's Mike Woods. I'm a veteran, and I work for the VA. I live in Mount Vernon. And as we discussed this morning, scheduling our veterans, our fellow veterans, for care in a timely fashion is very hard, even right now. But with the proposed cuts that are going to be released, I assume next month, it's going to make it almost impossible. What can be done to stop this or mitigate the outcome?
First of all, thank you for serving and for turning around in civilian capacity to continue serving those who serve. As you know, the services that the VA provides, they aren't a gift or a favor. They're America's way of keeping a promise to those who kept their promise to serve. And least we could do is make sure that it is actually possible to avail yourself of those services without, you shared earlier, it takes months to get things scheduled, and you live that. And as we know, the demand is rising. And by the way, one of the reasons the demand is rising is a very good thing, which is the PACT Act, that says that for those who were exposed to burn pits, that you're going to be presumptively covered. It's a big workload for the VA to take on, but it's the right thing to do. I got to tell you, in my entire time in the cabinet, there's only one time that I was actually brought to tears in a White House ceremony, and it was the day that I got to be there when the president signed the PACT Act and extended that care to so many people who deserved it. That, as you know, you don't have to be a VA professional or a political figure or much of an expert to know that if the workload is rising and you're cutting the personnel, you're going to have a problem. Cutting 80,000 people will, plain and simple, make it harder for the VA to execute its incredibly important mission. So what can we do about it? Well, to me, the most important thing right now is to apply pressure to anybody who's in a position to deal with it. And here enter the United States Congress. Now, right now, we may not be seeing a huge amount of courage from the president's allies in the United States Congress. But I think many of them, including some who represent this area or this state are already aware of two things. One, that these cuts are wrong, and two, that these cuts are unpopular. Unfortunately, they might actually care more about the fact that they're unpopular than the fact that they're wrong. Since they're both, this is an opportunity to get their attention. We're all here for this town hall. I can't help but notice that I'm not even elected official or running for anything. I'm here. I can't help but notice a lot of people who are elected officials aren't. There's a reason for that, right? They don't want to have to explain this stuff. Continuing to get their attention changes their incentives, and there's this sense of inevitability, of invincibility, right, that the president's trying to create. But it's not true. They'll back down. He'll back down when he screws up badly enough, but not as often as I'd like. But they change their mind all the time. They just change their mind about tariffs. What are the tariffs? 10%, 120%? I don't know. It's different every day. And I believe that they can be induced to change their mind about this if and only if there is more public pressure for a better policy. That one. Let's see. Red shirt. Just sit tight for a second. Mike will find its way to you.
Just a second, Stephen. Oh, please. Wait just a second.
Oh, Mike's coming your way.
Okay, Stephen Miller's talking about getting rid of habeas corpus, and this has been an onslaught since the beginning of the year. Do you think there's any line that he will cross that Congress is going to finally, do something like Republicans?
Yeah, great question.
Thank you.
I mean, habeas corpus, this is some really basic foundational stuff about the rule of law, right? And that's what tells you this is not a normal Democrat-Republican fight. Matter of fact, when a senior White House official is seeking to end habeas corpus, I have a question from some people I know. Where the hell are the libertarians right now? I got libertarian or conservative friends who are against the Clean Air Act. And they actually there's a philosophy to this. They don't say they hate clean air, but they are so opposed to the idea of government doing too much that even making sure we can breathe air is still too much. Some of them even say it's tyranny. Well, if you think the Clean Air Act is tyranny, what do you have to say when they're talking about getting rid of habeas corpus? And once again, I am convinced that members of Congress in the president's party know that this is wrong. They also know where their bread is buttered. Right? They live in an environment where they have more to fear from the president of the United States than the people of the United States. You could watch them do this math in their heads. I believe the most important thing is to change the math, to change the incentive, to make them more worried about how they're going to face their own constituents. If they're not going to town halls, there are other ways to get their attention. There are other peaceful means to get their attention, peaceful but energetic means to get their attention, that might remind them that if not out of principle, then at least out of political self-preservation, they have an interest in standing up for what's right. I'm sorry to say it's not happening on its own. It should have by now. But you can tell, because they have been forced to back down on some of their most ridiculous proposals, that there is a line. Is there a line he wouldn't cross if he could? No. But are there lines that he can't cross? Yes. And it's up to us, we the people. And we don't have to wait for an election. It's up to we the people to draw those lines and make it clear that you can go this far but no further. Purple shirt. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dorothy Army. I live in Brooklyn.
Thank you.
So you touched on this earlier about not voting against
Yeah.
something, but what are we voting for?
Yeah.
There's too many Democrats, and there's a handful of them that are fighting for us, but there's none of them that are saying, this is what we're fighting for you, and then following through when they're in office. That's what we need, and I think that's why we're in the situation we are, because there's too many people voting against the status quo, and we don't want our veterans, benefits to go back to what they were. We want them to be above and beyond, because we have more veterans, and we have people who are willing to work for it. And if the money is allocated correctly to the needs, to the actual needs of the people, then we're going to have better benefits for women, for marginalized people, for our veterans.
Yes.
That's what we need. And
that's right.
So my question was, how do we get them fired up to really serve us and hopefully we get it back soon, the power to do this.
I think you're describing such an important point. This isn't, look, obviously there is a parade of horribles emanating from this White House and this administration. But look, there are a lot of people, we all have neighbors who voted for him. By the way, a lot of them don't even like him. But they said, maybe he's going to make me better off. Maybe he's going to just smash everything and come up with something better. He did, By the way, he did the first half, the smashing stuff up part, right? He did that. Just not the part where it makes us better off. And it is both politically and substantively wrong, in my opinion, if all my party has to say is, let's go back. I am not here saying we got to make things back the way they were in 2023. Look, the hard truth is, if our government, our politics, our society, and our economy were working, we wouldn't be here. Proto-authoritarian populist movements don't just come out of nowhere. They find fertile ground when things are not working. And again, in a room of folks who have served, you know this. You know how frustrating the old status quo with the VA was, even as incredible things were done to make it better. And one thing every veteran is an expert in is bureaucracy, right? We all know so much about paperwork. We've seen Americans at their best, but we've seen government at its most frustrating because we were part of the largest, most bureaucratic bureaucracy in the world, which is the United States Department of Defense. And yet, we can make us better off. So take the budget. And again, look, everybody's talking, including me, talking about the jumbo jet because I'm pissed off about the jumbo jet. But I believe the most important story today is that the numbers started coming back on the budget reconciliation put forward by the congressional Republicans, which last time I checked, literally as we speak, they're marking up in committee and voting on. And it is literally a zero-sum game because the more they do this, the less there is for that. So yes, I am against the enormous tax cuts for the rich that they are pushing through. But part of why we're against that is we're for taking those dollars and using them to make sure that nobody in this country, no child in this country goes without health insurance. To make sure that no child in this country goes hungry. We heard earlier about that USDA program that my friend and colleague Secretary Vilsack had to help make sure that more food goes directly from farms to people who need it. I'm for that. We could do that, and we could do better. And look, we got to come up with some new answers. And I'm talking about my party, too. The post-World War II order, international and domestic, is gone. Or at least it will be by the time these guys are done with it. And the truth is, it's been a while since it was really keeping up with the realities of the 21st century. We need to be presenting answers in accordance with our values on how to make sure government can actually get stuff done, actually work, be more user-friendly, deliver. And that means some tough conversations on our own side about how we get in our own ways sometimes with government. But as somebody who worked for years to deliver transportation projects, I know there's things we could do to make that happen faster and better. And it means being ready for some of these things coming our way. I think even now we are underreacting to stuff like artificial intelligence. Or as President Trump's Secretary of Education calls it, A1. I don't know if you saw this. She thinks there's something called A1, which means she doesn't understand that it stands for AI, which means she doesn't understand artificial intelligence. But for all the problems that technology can create, it can actually create a future where we're working less hours and have more money in our pocket. That's something we're for. But it means making sure that the incredible gains that come from that technology, that we have a policy structure that gets a share of that out to the American people, instead of taking somebody from being worth $200 billion to $400 billion. That's what we're for, among other things. Let's see. Right here.
Okay. Tim Nash, Iowa Army National Guard, still serving.
Thank you.
So when I have a lot of conservative friends, especially since I'm still serving, talk with a lot of conservatives and kind of talk about what's going on with the Trump administration. And one thing that I hear is, yeah, we don't know we don't know what's going on with him. Nobody really wants to admit that he's just doing a horrible job. But a lot of people then say, but the Dems are just horrible right now. Nobody trusts them, and they're just in the toilet. So, and you wrote, I haven't read your book yet. It's in my Audible library, Trust. But I guess my question is, how do we get the American people to trust in the Democratic Party again, as a party of the working person, as a party of veterans, and as the party of patriotism? How do we do that?
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, look, I take comfort in the fact that the president is unpopular. But a fact, by the way, that you might not know, not feel if you believe some of the coverage on the internet. The president's unpopular, but that doesn't mean my side wins. Democrats do not have the best brand around here or in a lot of places. And there's a lot of reasons for that, some fair, some unfair. I think the most important thing is that we connect everything we believe, everything we say, everything we do to everyday life. I'm convinced that the only reason we have politics, the only reason politics is worth being involved in, is because of how every decision that happens in a big white building in Washington, D.C. finds its way into our everyday lives. And nobody knows that better than people who have been sent into war on the orders of people who sit in those big white buildings. But we've got to show that we're about that and not about what seem like these incredibly abstract things. We've got to meet people where they are. We've got to have a different message. Look, you know, I considered it important to make clear some things that were going right in the economy, for example. But there were a lot of things that weren't this last time around. And if somebody's upset, anybody who's ever been married knows, if someone you love is upset and your response is, you shouldn't be upset, you should be happy, actually. Anybody ever try that? How'd that go over? Right? That does not meet people where they are. People are upset for a reason, and we got to have that dialogue. And that's the other thing, it was right there in your question. You said talking to conservatives, which weirdly, some people on my side have trouble doing. You know, look, we're in an environment where more and more of our information gets fed to us in ways that are pre-sorted. So all I see, I take out my phone and all I see is, here's this person I already agree with saying something that I agree with. Here's this person I already disagree with looking foolish. And here's this other person I don't like doing something I don't like, right? And that's all we get, because that's the rage bait, clickbait phenomenon. We have to find ways to cut across that. And there are several. One is appearing in conservative spaces, my unexpected specialty of going on Fox News an awful lot. Podcasts. I'm doing a lot of I've never done a 3-hour podcast before. But there are all these sources of information that our friends who think differently than we do about politics are getting information from, that frankly are not subject to the editorial standards of a newspaper. And that makes it all the more important to get in there and present a different way of looking at things. And then the last thing I'll say, offline. We're going to have conversations that are offline. That's what this is. I mean, we'll probably take some of this and put it online, but just human beings being around each other. It sounds like the most basic thing. It happens in a military unit. I mean, it happened in my vehicle. I was in a conversation with people with radically different politics and racial and economic backgrounds. Sometimes felt like the only thing we had in common was that flag. But precisely because of that, we've got to understand each other, and I felt I got to understand the country better. We need to seek that out in neighborhoods, in faith communities, in rooms like this. And it's one of the things I'm determined to do in the months and years ahead. Thank you. Let's see. Sir. I'm really challenging the mic runners here. Sorry. They're speedy, though.
Mr. Secretary, Scott Phones, Iowa Democratic Veterans Caucus Chair for the state.
Thank you.
And an Air Force veteran. The keystone of our nation is rule of law. And every one of us in here understands that implicitly we follow the law. We may not like it, but we're going to follow it, unless it's Highway 13 in the afternoon when you're driving home. That being said, we have an element of due process. And what we're seeing with Garcia and other individuals being denied that due process. Can you please tell the audience here and kind of give them the tools that they need in order to have a conversation to say, this is why due process is so important?
Yeah. I guess the way I would think about it is that our most important rights and freedoms are safe if and only if they apply across the board. So just like freedom of speech isn't freedom of speech if it's only for speech we agree with, right? It's why, because Voltaire said, I detest what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it, right? It is precisely with disagreeable speech that we prove that we really mean it when we say freedom of speech. Same thing with the rule of law. You know, they're saying like, oh, well, this guy, you know, he's a criminal. The whole point is that no one person, least of all, no one politician, gets to decide that you're a criminal. Who decides? We have a process. We have laws. That's what due process is. You're not a criminal because the head of the government of the country you live in says you're a criminal. Then, if that is the way it works, we are not a nation of laws. The whole Constitution points to a way of making sure that we give people that due process, that we count on that due process. And it can involve, for those who are involved in law enforcement and the judicial system here, it involves probable cause and a jury of your peers. I didn't go to law school. I'm not a lawyer. You shouldn't have to be to know that due process is afforded to everybody, because it is through that due process that our society can make decisions, including challenging decisions about what happens to you if you are in fact held to be in violation of the law. As, ironically, happened to the president himself when he went through probable cause, due process, judge, jury, all that. He got due process. So should everybody else. That's how I think about it. All right, we're getting some votes for... Sir. Thank you. I do my best.
They gave me a mic, but I don't think I even have it turned on. My question, my name is Ken, and I'm a retired teacher.
Thank you. Thank you for that service.
Right now, there is a case that's going before the Supreme Court out of Oklahoma that is dealing with what amounts to the separation of state and church. It also goes to one of the other questions about where the tax money is being spent. And this is a case where the tax money could be spent on church schools. I pay $1,000 quarterly estimates. I pay more taxes than Jeff Bezos does. I don't mind paying taxes, but I would like to have it spent where it needs to be spent. I would like you to speak about the separation of church and state and tax money being spent on public schools.
Yeah. Amen. Look, the separation of church and state is a foundational principle of our republic. Our country was founded by people who decided they didn't want to have to live subject to somebody else's interpretation of his own religion. They were, by the way, religious people, but they didn't want to have to live by somebody else's religion. And they did not seek to impose theirs through the mechanisms and the machinery of government on anybody else. It's a foundational principle, and it is absolutely being tested in our schools. A public school is, speaking of democracy, subject to the decisions of a school board that you get to vote people onto or off of. It's part of a democratic process, as should be everything that we pay for with our taxpayer dollars. And I say that as somebody who appreciates religious education. I benefited from religious education. I went to St. Joseph's High School, the Catholic high school in South Bend, Indiana. I got a great education there, but my family never expected for 1 minute that our neighbor on Marquette Avenue would have to pay for it. And this is one of many things going before the courts that affect what's going on in our schools. This other case about being able to take your kid out of this or that one, basically line item veto on any lesson that is completely, just in practical terms, completely unmanageable. I mean, the idea that a teacher is supposed to keep a roster for every student and only include a different combination of students in every paragraph of every textbook is, again, against the basic idea that we hold our school systems accountable to a school board that we elect, but then their job is to hire people who can be trusted to run those schools in accordance with community values. That's the idea. By the way, that's an idea that is richly rooted in a tradition of respect for local decision-making that conservatives used to talk a lot about, and I think we all ought to be able to agree on. So. And one last point, again, because this isn't just about what we're against, it's what we're for. It's not just that we are against forcing people to pay with their tax dollars for private education that they might not subscribe to or agree with. We are for using those tax dollars for excellent, first-rate public education. All right, right here.
On your left. Pardon me, thanks. I'll hold this for you.
My name's Ned Fry. I live in Mediapolis, Iowa. I'm a retired command sergeant major with 33 years of service. "18 veterans a day commit suicide, and if we fire 83,000 people in the VA, I have been sending Lieutenant Colonel Joni Ernst messages and messages. I want to know how many of those people are doctors and nurses and suicide hotline people. And I got one other thing to say. At least I know what the Declaration of Independence is, and it's not a love letter.
I couldn't have said that better myself. Well, thank you for that service, and thank you for taking a stand for those who come home. And we, definitely people I served with came home physically intact, but they still didn't make it. And it is a profound crisis. And the good news is our country is gradually doing a much better job, generally and with respect to veterans, of recognizing culturally the importance of mental health, understanding that mental health ought to be something we deal with and be able to talk about. That someday you could talk about having a experience with depression or bipolar disorder the same way that you can talk about getting ready to have a knee replaced. We, as a country, are not there yet, but we've come a long way. And yet at the very moment when the VA is staffing up and gearing up to better reflect that, they're cutting people. I met with someone at the VA earlier today who was explaining how part of what they've done is when there was a vacancy, like a physician moves on, they're getting ready to hire another one, they eliminate it. And that way they can say it's fully staffed, but they've just reduced the number of people who can serve our veterans. They made cuts that impacted the Veterans Crisis Line. Why in the world would the Trump administration cut a literal lifeline for America's veterans? Thank you. Folks up front, yeah.
So I'm Ava Jones, I'm 20. I'm both a traumatic brain injury survivor and I'm currently fighting cancer. The type of cancer I have, Hodgkin lymphoma, is very well researched and has saved my life. The research has saved the chemo, has saved my life. What are the impacts of slashing research funding in educational institutions, and what can be done about it for people that do not have as great of a cancer that I have, or as lucky as I am for the type of cancer I have?
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that with us. And I imagine you just picked up a whole bunch of people who are rooting for you in your recovery and your future. And thank you for reminding us that research also is not just some abstract ideal, although it's a worthy ideal to build up the knowledge of this nation in service of a better future, but it's an extremely practical thing. So many of the most important developments that we rely on, from cancer treatments to the internet itself, came about because the American taxpayer, through entities from DARPA to the National Institutes of Health, funded that kind of research that saved lives, that is saving lives. And we'll never even know just how many people were benefited or even saved by that. A great nation is one that aspires to lead the world in that kind of research. Again, not merely out of national pride, though we have a lot to be proud of in the advancements that have been funded by the American taxpayer, but because it makes everyday life better, because it makes everyday life possible. And I believe in the kind of, talk about what we're for, not just what we're against. Obviously, we're against randomly and cruelly slashing important research programs. We're for what this country could be, can be, has repeatedly shown itself to be at its best, leading the way, because that becomes a gift to the entire world. The entire human species benefits when the American people make that kind of research possible. So let's be clear that this is a country that believes in science, believes in the potential of modern medicine, and believes that it not only needs to be researched and developed, but then made available, which is what's at stake in this fight over Medicaid health insurance. You have to be able to get the care that the best minds in America have invented and made possible. Thank you again for sharing your story. Stay strong. Front center.
Sorry to make you do that again. There is a bill that the Republicans are currently putting out there that I don't think is getting enough kind of publication when it comes to everybody, and that's the SAVE Act. Essentially has to do with voting rights, and especially women's voting rights, married women, disenfranchised. Can you kind of speak a little bit about that in regards to just educating everyone on what it is and what we can do to help combat it?
Yeah, thank you. So one thing that my Republican friends come up with from time to time is stuff that sounds really good on its face until you really look into it. All of us believe that only eligible citizens should be able to vote in American elections, which is why that's already the law. And what's extremely troubling about many of these proposals that have been put through either at the state level or federally is that in the name of election integrity, they actually reduce the integrity of our elections. And what I mean by that is that, and by the way, there's tons of research that's been done. People have been, it's incredibly rare, but people have been prosecuted for fraudulently voting, as they should be, because you can't do that, you shouldn't do that. What we found is that the rate of that happening is in the neighborhood of 1 in a billion votes. And these measures, on the other hand, can prevent thousands and thousands of eligible, qualified American citizens from exercising that democratic right. The truth is, as with a lot of things in our society and our government, there are certain things that we ought to make it easier to do with integrity. It ought to be easier to build a bridge. It ought to be easier to file your taxes. And it ought to be easier for an eligible, qualified citizen to exercise their fundamental right to vote. So some legislation that will prevent 5 or 10 fraudulent votes out of a billion, but also prevent thousands and thousands of Americans from voting is, in my view, a distortion of our elections. And it's one I think they wouldn't be really into if it weren't something they thought might benefit them politically, which is really, I believe, what this is about. By the way, if you really want to have election integrity, one thing I would do is establish as a principle, as a right, that you shouldn't have to wait more than an hour to cast your vote. Because if you want to ask what has pushed an election this way or that way, what has skewed it to be different from what it would have been if everybody expressed their opinion, the number of people who might conceivably have voted who shouldn't is, I am certain, much less than the number of voters who walked away because they had something else to do, who are exactly the people who have the most on the line when they're working 3 jobs and still depending on Medicaid, and now their Medicaid benefits are being put on the line, or any of the other things that are being done. So I'm glad you raised that. It's unsexy, this process stuff, right? It's unsexy, but it's incredibly important. Because at the end, it's the process that makes our republic what it is. If we don't have that, we're just another country out there, which I'm afraid is what the president thinks we are. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Pete. My name is Blake. I'm originally from Los Angeles, but now attending the University of Iowa. Been a supporter of yours since 2020. First, I wanted to say it was my first time in Iowa when I first got to tour the school, and Iowans are some of the most amazing people I've ever met.
Right.
You guys are, it's a family here. It's beautiful. I wanted to ask you about the Democrats' response to this. I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it feels to me there's an idea like this isn't normal. But that's it. It's just talked about. I remember my friends here can tell you about how frustrated I was during Trump's address to Congress and how Democrats brought signs. And that felt like that was it. And it felt like there wasn't much pushback. And it feels like to me that Democrats are not really fighting back, at least publicly. And I wanted to specifically note on Iowa being the first state to disenfranchise trans people, which is something I feel like the Democrats have kind of forgotten about, not focused on. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, there's this theory out there that if we just kind of hang back, don't do much, then the people in charge today will screw it up, and then they'll get blamed for it, and then we'll win. I disagree. First of all, while I agree that they will screw it up, I disagree that we should let them. And I also disagree that they will be blamed for it. They may not be good at governing, but they are really good at allocating blame. And while I think we do need to revisit some of the things that we have had to say policy-wise that haven't kept up with the times as a party, that doesn't mean ever throwing vulnerable people under the bus. Americans may have questions about how to make sure sports are safe and fair, which I get. But Americans also understand that your gender identity shouldn't affect whether you get to vote. And Americans understand that if you are, for example, a soldier who is doing a good job, who is getting good ratings from your commander, who is contributing to the readiness of this mission, who is ready to put your life on the line, and who happens to be transgender, you ought to be honored and not kicked out of the military. People get that. And I also think deep down, I have to believe that most Americans get that whatever group happens to be disfavored at the moment, and it's always somebody, that the kinds of politicians, left, right, or center, who get ahead by stepping on their faces, nothing good comes of that. So we got to be strong in our values and strong in our opposition and equally strong in what it is we are proposing to do next, which I think is the part that seems to come hardest to us right now. I see this whole debate in my party is all about, well, it's all about him. It's all about how much to accommodate him or how to oppose him. And I get it. It's very much something that consumes our attention. But we need to be a little more in touch with our first principles and what we would do if he never got into politics. What would we be doing if we were in charge? That's what people need to know. And through that, then our opposition makes a little more sense. And we should not be afraid to oppose ferociously all of the abuses that are coming from these folks in charge right now. Thanks for coming. There. Yep.
My name is Myra Frana, and I want to know what you have to comment about the Afghani refugees that have been given till May 20th to self-deport. They protected our military. They stood shoulder to shoulder. We brought them here 3 years ago, and now we're leaving them behind.
Yeah, these Afghans, they put their lives and their families' lives on the line to stand with us. They live in villages and places where they could be killed just for being suspected of having cooperated or sometimes talked to an American. And a lot of us who were deployed, we couldn't have done our jobs without them. And by the way, they're just incredible people. We had a couple translators and Afghan folks we worked with at great risk to their lives who were. So we started this fantasy football league. I'm not a huge football follower, but you get bored out there sometimes. You pick up new hobbies and habits. It was amazing. They'd never seen a football game in their lives. But they loved America. They loved the guys they were serving with. They actually wound up generally doing better than the rest of us because they didn't sentimentally imagine that they could outsmart the machine. They just went by the numbers, you know? And I think about the conversations that we would have about, we talked about corn because some of them are from parts of Afghanistan that grow agricultural products. And I was trying to think of a way to relate to somebody who has such a different life than mine. And being from Indiana, I realized we could talk about agriculture and about corn. But at the end of the day, it's not about, their personalities. It's about their sacrifice. And it's not just about them. It's about us. It's about the integrity of a country that must see to it that we keep our promises. The security of a country that must make sure that whenever, as we undoubtedly will do again, whenever we are asking somebody to put their life on the line for us, that they believe us when we say, do this, and we will have your back too. It is a security imperative, it is a moral imperative, and it is just plain the right thing to do, to take care of these refugees. And the idea that you just kick them out, not to mention so many others. And by the way, the level of vetting that these people go through to come here, the level of process that goes into that. The church I belong to in Michigan was involved in resettling some of these folks who, by the way, they're really smart and really talented and really have a lot of grit, tend to do very well when they get set up here. They work hard and they contribute. They're not looking for favors. They're looking to contribute, just as they did over there, putting their lives on the line to help America as we were in their country. America is poorer and worse off without them. And again, these vetted individuals from not just Afghanistan, but a lot of countries are being turned away. We can do better than that. And we need to. I popped into Raygun on my lunch break today. It's they still got it.
Hi, I'm Bryce. I'm 19. One of my biggest goals in life a few years down the road is to have kids. And I feel like the way things are going now, I feel a lot of people my age are scared to have kids and bring them into the world, especially with like rewriting history in the classes and like mandating Bibles in public school and all the other things that we could sit here and name. So my question is, what can we do to make the future of the next generations to come safer?
Well, I'm kind of biased on this because having kids is the best, hardest but best thing that I've ever done or that's ever happened to me. And I went through a big part of my early adulthood not sure if that was something that was even possible. Because when I came of age, getting married wasn't even an option, let alone getting married and having kids. And we went through a whole, like a lot of adoptive parents, we went through a whole roller coaster of fits and starts and heartbreak. And one day got the call, and next day we were holding him in our arms. And it's the most incredible thing. And we think a lot about the values we want them to grow up with, the experience we want them to have, the way we want them to see how they fit in the world. Chasten, I wrote a book about trust. Chasten just wrote a kid's book. It's coming out next week about a family kind of like ours getting ready for someone they love to come home. And it's just one part of how we're trying to raise them with the right values, and above all, make sure they know they're loved. It's why I'm doing this. It's funny in a way. Part of what I think I'm going to tell them when I'm telling them about the flag, like I said earlier, is that even though I didn't know it yet, and even though they didn't exist yet, they were part of the reason I did all that. And I think that's what each of us who participates in society and in civic life and in politics and perhaps in the military is really doing it for. It's for who comes next. And we also have to do this with some perspective. I know it can feel like a complicated or even bleak time, but our country's been through some stuff. We could be maybe a little bit too precious about things like political violence and unlawful behavior by those in charge. I had the great honor of getting to know John Lewis before he passed away. I wonder sometimes what he would think of this moment. But what I know is that when we talk, if you talk about this moment, it would not come as novel to him that there's a side of America that's capable of political violence and illegal behavior by people in positions of power. That has happened. And what is best about America is that we've actually been able to face that down as a country. Not perfectly and not always, but more often than not. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that we're not just going to save our values in this country, but that the future can actually be better than the present, that it has to be. I really believe that. Talk about generational change. I used to tell my parents that I kind of envied them being young in the 60s. Because it looked pretty fun. And the music and the culture and the protests, it just seemed, I romanticized it. I still do in a way. But after hearing me say that one too many times, my mom sat me down and said, it was terrible. A lot of things about it were terrible. People we looked up to were getting assassinated. My friends were being sent to the Vietnam War. We didn't know what was going to happen to our country. And we romanticize a period like that now because we know that some amazing things emerged from that. And we know that in so many of the most important struggles of that moment, we were as a country able to beat back some of our worst demons. And I think the 2020s might be like that. I envision a conversation where I'm talking to the kids when they're old enough to say, what were you doing in the 20s? I want to say, we stood up, we spoke up, we came together, and that's why your life is better now. We have to make it happen. I'll come back to this.
Hi, my name is Mary Pat Hansen. I'm a retired teacher.
Thank you.
I always consider the Democrat Party the party of inclusivity, right? We cover and stand for a lot of marginalized groups, underserved groups. But I think we're missing a group. My best job I ever had is as a mom. And so I have a 21-year-old son. And there's this group of white young men between 18 and 25 who we are not reaching, right? And my son totally understands his white privilege. So kudos to you two young men that are here today. Thank you. Yeah. So my thought is to tell people who have nephews, grandsons, sons, how do we draw that group in? Because their frontal lobes are not developed yet. We all know that, right? And so some of the Trumpism stuff, they think is cool or funny. So how do we get that group of young men to feel like they belong to the Democratic Party? Because I feel like that's one of the groups that we do not reach out to enough.
Yeah. Well, at risk of sounding obvious, step one is talk to them. And those conversations need to happen. A lot of them are online. A lot of these, I taught a day a week. I was at the University of Chicago this spring. And I'd always do a show of hands with the students and ask them where they got their information. And this won't be a revelation to younger folks who are here. I asked them what percentage of, how many of them, I always started with television, because that's how I'm used to getting my news. How many of you get your news by watching a television? You real? Okay. You might be the first person I've met. Do you actually watch television on a television? And all your friends are saying that's really weird. It's like retro. It's going to be like vinyl. So watching television to this generation is like vinyl.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much. We have time for one more question.
Okay. Well, then, just to finish the thought, and then I'll take one more. Thank you, General. They really keep you squared away, these Army types. We got to be talking to folks where they are. That's why I'm going on these podcasts. The 3-hour podcast was not on my bingo card until a few weeks ago. Going to be doing more of those, but also, again, speak to how everyday life is going to be different. If it just looks like a show or a game, then you go with whoever's cooler, whoever looks like they have more swagger sometimes. I mean, that's something that happens when you reduce politics to a kind of a death match, wrestling death match. That's what it's become. We can do better than that, but we have to have that conversation and have something to offer besides just these guys are no good, even though these guys are no good. Yes? No pressure. The last question.
Hi, my name is Brittany McDonald. I'm a University of Iowa graduate student in social work. That's just one of my identities. I'm also a mother of a child with disabilities. So my question is, how can we, as a nation, bring in the disability community when it comes to policy? They're often an afterthought, and it's something that I am strongly passionate about, fighting for the right, not only my son, but everybody with disabilities. So what can we do?
Thank you. Well, thank you for standing up for your son. And look, this is another example of a test of who we are as a country. I had a great, just a week or two ago, caught up on the phone with a great leader in disability policy and a great Iowan, Tom Harkin, who I worked with a lot. And one of the things I'm proudest of that we did during my time in transportation was things like a rule to make sure that airlines had to treat passengers with disabilities better than they do, including wheelchair handling. As I'm sure you know, Americans with disabilities are the biggest category of Americans recognized by civil rights legislation. And as I'm sure you also know, when we do right by people with disabilities, that doesn't just benefit a disabled American, it benefits the community, the country, the family, whether it's transportation, making sure that the conference or the wedding that somebody couldn't go to if they were unable to go because of some barrier, making sure they can contribute, or whether it's just making sure we're the kind of community where everybody has a place and has belonging. That makes us better, everybody better. And of course it makes disabled Americans better off. Plus, and this is something that gets too often overlooked, a great many Americans who aren't part of the disability community today will be. So many of us will age into disability. So we're doing right by everybody when we do better. Now, I've been troubled by what I've seen, including the new administration looking ready to roll back some of the work that we did. Airlines that responded to the wheelchair rule by suing. But I know that this is something that Americans understand, because the other thing about the disability community is it cuts across every category of geography and income and race, you name it. And talk about folks who have a lot on the line. If they throw people off CHIP or cut Medicaid or make it more difficult to get in-home care, let alone the accommodations out there in our transportation systems and our communities that, by the way, make it possible for so many disabled Americans to work as well as to live well. It is the right thing to do, and it reflects well on us. And maybe a great note to end on, because the one thing that I see both in the ethos of a veteran and in the culture of the Midwest, I'd like to think universal American culture, but definitely in the Midwest, is this determination to stand up for each other. And whether it's the teachings of my faith that whatever you do for the least among us is how you make yourself useful, is the very stuff of salvation, or whether it is the democratic principle that everyone has an equal vote, no matter your wealth or your standing or your story, or the good old-fashioned Midwestern idea that you're not better than anyone. We're all in this together. That's what I think we are about, and I wouldn't be here with you if I didn't believe that we can live up to that in our time, and one day, through the work that we do, not just election stuff and campaign stuff, but in this very moment, at this very town hall, and the very conversations that we're all going to have as we leave here, including with that challenging uncle, that we will put ourselves in a position to look back on the 2020s with pride rather than regret. So thank you for being part of that. Thank you for the warm welcome back to Iowa. And we'll meet again. Thanks very much.